Theo with that.
Let's see.
Yo, what is
Oh,
up?
I figured you'd be the first one to do that.
Yes, I am always willing, and no, I'm always wanting to say hi to everyone.
Yes.
How are you, Zach?
I'm doing well. I'm doing really well. Yesterday was a pretty laid back day. Um, so yeah, it was nice to just kind of relax and not have a lot to do.
Are
Today's a
you
bit.
bike riding at all? I know you said like a couple weeks ago you were like stopped, and then like you kind of did that analogy thing where it's like, oh, the further away you stray from it. But have you
Yeah,
gotten back out?
this week I didn't just because it was so hot.
Yeah.
uh, I went last Friday and Sunday, and then ran on Saturday. So I'm trying to just kind of do a little something every day.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
I want to start going. Let's go, because I'm starting to ride my bike more.
Okay.
If we stay 6 feet apart.
Apart with masks.
Yes.
Yes. Got to do it right.
Gotta do it right. Gotta
For,
stop this spread.
not for
Spread the
ourselves.
Lord, not the virus.
Yes. And if not for ourselves, we do it for our grandmothers.
Yes,
You know? Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure. Even though they live in New York. Oh,
That's okay. It
that's
counts.
okay. Symbolic. It's symbolic.
Yeah, still makes sense.
Yes.
All right,
Okay.
man.
I'll let someone else hop on.
All right.
Good seeing you. Bye 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 bye. Bye everyone.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Um.
Wait, hi!
Good morning, Kyla.
I'm taking off the wallpaper in our bathroom as we're redoing it.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
That's like the least fun project ever, huh?
Yeah, I'm getting paid $5. It's good.
Oh, nice. Removing wallpaper is so difficult.
How many tools?
You're using it. Do you have like, are you putting hot water on it too? Does that help?
I'm using this Piranha gel.
Perfect. As long as you got something to help you out.
Yeah, that would have been about it.
Yeah. What, are you guys painting it a different color?
We're just painting it white.
Okay.
It's
Cool.
15 years old, so it hasn't been redone yet.
So it's time.
Yeah, it's about time. It's
Nice.
a little bit outdated.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
I didn't choose.
Did you
All right.
anything, did you do anything else fun this week?
Oh, um, no,
Not really.
no.
Kind of hung out at home and did homework.
Well, we try to get like a baby pool, but they're all sold out. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Hard to
And
come.
sides. Come on.
What?
Slip and sides are gone too. There's like none. There's nothing.
That's too bad. Yeah, it's hot out too. You need something to refresh with, right?
All right. I'll let somebody else hop on.
All right. All right. Good to see you.
Goodbye.
Bye bye. Anybody else want to jump on? If not, we'll just get going. Nope. Okay. Um, 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 Well, cool. Hey, this week we're starting a two-part series called Fighting Words. That's all about kind of this idea of how to do conflict well. And I think this is really coming at a great time because look, here's the reality, and I know that this is probably your reality too. Is that as much as you love your family, and as much as you get along with your siblings, or at least want to get along with your siblings, and as much as you enjoy their company, I know this, that at this point in time, there are likely moments, if not every day, at least a couple times a week, where you find yourself in conflict with them. And that's just the reality of being close to people, especially for long periods of time. And the reality is that conflict, no matter what relationship it is, whether it's your family or your friends or whatever, it will eventually make its way into every relationship. But the bigger thing to keep in mind is actually how we deal with conflict more so than how to avoid it, because it's going to happen. It's better to learn how to deal with it than it is to ignore it. And here's the other truth, is that we all want to be good at it, right? And we've all seen bad examples of friends who are always arguing or at each other's throats, or teammates who can't exist on the same team and throw away their success, end up getting kicked off the team for not getting along, or roommates who let thing after thing pile up until they don't acknowledge each other when they're in the same room, or even grown adults who don't talk to their parents because of things that were said decades and decades ago, or spouses who destroy their marriage, and families because they can't resolve their issues in a healthy way. Right? We've all seen or know of these bad examples. And in reality, when it comes to conflict, we know that there's a lot on the line, right? Even if we don't know each other very well, I know this. I know that none of us dream of having unhealthy relationships. But the reality is that being followers of Jesus impacts every part of our lives. Every part. And right after Ashley and I got married, we got to go on our honeymoon, and it was amazing. We went to this awesome place in Mexico called Tulum, which is kind of like, the way I describe it, it's kind of like the Laguna Beach of Mexico. It's like a little artist colony. It's not incredibly touristy. It's kind of near Cancun, but Cancun is like the big major resorts, and then this place is more like artists and small hotels, and it was just really, it was a really neat place. And the hotel that we stayed in was actually a tree house that was built right on the edge of the beach, right on the edge of the ocean. And it was so cool. We had these great meals that we didn't have to work really hard for. We had so much fun. We snorkeled a lot. There was like a reef right in front of the hotel, and we snorkeled a lot. And it was amazing. It was paradise. And what was crazy about it is that right when we got back from our honeymoon, we packed everything we owned, that both of us owned. We packed everything into a U-Haul truck and put Ashley's car on a trailer behind it. And we drove out here from Virginia. So if you look at a map, we actually lived in Virginia Beach. So if you look at a map and you look at America, basically if you went straight across America to the East Coast, would be Virginia Beach. So when we were making this drive, it was about as far as you could possibly be without going like to like New York, like, you know, diagonal across the country. But if you just went straight across as far as you could go, you'd hit Virginia Beach. And so we had about 5 days of camping, and we camped across the country. So we had like honeymoon round one, and then we came home. We worked really hard. We packed up the truck, and we started driving, and then we joked around that it was honeymoon round two. But under all of the jokes about that is that when we camped across the country, guys, it was not easy. It was not like our honeymoon. We had to make all of our meals on the road, like at a campsite. We had to set up and tear down a tent every day. We had to make sure that the dog was doing well. And I'll tell you what, our dog does not like sleeping in a tent. And that was miserable. And so we realized doing this that there were lots of times of conflict, or even when it was like, do we feel like we're lost? Who needs to find directions? I don't know. I'm driving. I can't. Can you? And we would find ourselves kind of in conflict and in disagreement. And keep in mind, this is all within 10 days of being married. And so we were still trying to figure out what to do in conflict. And we had to learn it quick because we were on the road and there wasn't a lot of time to figure out how to do it poorly. We kind of needed to learn how to do it well right now. because if we didn't, we were going to be stuck in the car together, miserable for 10 or 12 hours every day. And so we learned through that process how to do that. And look, I know that you're not married, but I bet you've experienced this honeymoon phase before. I bet that maybe at one point in time you switched schools to a new school. And when you switched to that new school, everything seemed great. Right? It's like, oh man, this is so much better than the place that I came from. The conflict that I had with all those people at that other place, the people who bullied me, that's all gone. It disappeared. Or maybe for you, you just found a new group of friends that you started hanging out with. And it's going really well in the beginning. Or maybe for you, you started dating your crush. And in the first couple times you hang out, or the first couple weeks that you're dating, right? Everything seems easy, right? And we're willing to make compromises and sacrifices for the other people when it's new and it's fresh, without a whole lot of pushback. And it would be really nice if things could stay that way forever, right? But they don't, and eventually we become aware of other people's faults and our own. We become aware of issues and problems that we didn't see at first. Now, much of the New Testament is made up of letters written by James, John, Peter, and Paul, and they're usually addressed to young churches, to churches that are just forming, or churches that have only existed for a little while. And what I love about these letters, I absolutely love these letters because they're so real, and they're written about these very, very real things that are still relevant to us today, like going through trials, going through something we don't understand why we're going through that hurts a little bit, right? They talk about purity. They talk about generosity. They talk about love. They talk about temptation. And in most of these letters, the writers have the exact same theme as they're going through these letters, as they're writing these letters. It's simple. It seems like this is the solution to just about everything they talk about. It's this: being a follower of Jesus should affect everything that you do. And this goes for kind of their, right, it's their response to purity. Why should we stay pure? How do we stay pure? Well, being a follower of Jesus should change everything about you. Okay, okay, what about love? How do we become more loving? Okay, well, being a follower of Jesus should change and affect everything that you do. So when it comes to conflict, it's no surprise that it's not different. When it comes to conflict, we need to look at it as being a follower of Jesus should affect everything that we do. So in this letter that we're going to look at today, it's Colossians. So if you have a Bible nearby and you want to look it up, we'll be spending some time in Colossians 3. And in this letter, Paul, he writes to a church in a place called Colossae. And as you read through, especially in chapter 3, you'll see how he addresses this concept that being a follower of Jesus impacts the way that they deal with lust, sexuality, greed, anger, and the language they use. And you wonder why. Like, why does that matter? Why does that change? Why does it impact everything? And it's easy. It's because they're new creations. And it doesn't matter what their backgrounds are, simply that they follow Jesus. And you might be wondering, like, what do you mean by new creation? So, when we choose to follow Jesus, when we believe in him wholeheartedly, Paul writes about this a lot, is that the old self, the person that comes into the relationship with Jesus, falls away. Now, Paul's story is a little bit crazier because he was actually like persecuting Christians. He was killing Christians. And he says, when I met Jesus, that old self died and it fell away. And I became a new person. Paul's name changed from Saul, the guy who was persecuting Christians, to Paul, one of Jesus' apostles. And Paul ended up, if you read through the New Testament, most of the letters in the New Testament are actually written by Paul. So this guy that went from being a Christian killer becomes one of the most influential people in Christian culture. One of the most influential Jesus followers came from the least likely place. And so what he's saying when he says that we become a new creation is just this. It's that we are no longer that old self. We are now something new. Now, in verse 12, he kind of begins to write in detail. And maybe you'll relate to this. Have you ever known someone who started like hanging out with a different group of people, and they started dressing completely different, and they started talking completely different, and maybe acting completely different? They start listening to different music, and even the way that they dress changes. Well, that's kind of what Paul is getting at here, but in a good way. He says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Right? Isn't that kind of wild? We live in this world where when we see people who are dealing with conflict in relationships, a lot of times they deal with that conflict through rage or arrogance or brashness or insensitive words, right? They're quick to be tempered. They hold judges, or they're super passive aggressive. And maybe for some of us, this is what it feels like in our homes right now. Right? That the more time you spend with your family, the easier it is to lose your patience with your mom when she asks you to do that thing that you've been putting off all day, that like 50th time, and you're like, oh, Mom, why? Or maybe for you, you are finding that you're fighting with your siblings a lot more. Or maybe for you, you're watching your parents, and this is kind of how they're starting to respond to each other. See, what I think is crazy about this time, right, is that not only are we dealing with the interpersonal conflict, but we've got a lot conflicting up here, because there are no like set answers to what's going on. So not only are we having to deal with interpersonal conflict, we're also having to deal with some of our own conflicts in our own mind. And so when we're trying to deal with our own conflicts in our own minds, oftentimes it's even harder to deal with our interpersonal conflict. And so what Paul is saying is that we should do it differently. We should dress differently. Wear mercy, wear kindness, wear humility, gentleness, and patience. And guess what the most important piece of clothing Paul says is? It's not a Gucci belt. It's love. But why? Why do we need these things? And why do we need to be so intentional about handling conflict with these responses? Well, it's because there's an underlying expectation. And I think Paul makes it really clear. This underlying expectation and thing that he knows is that dealing with people isn't easy. And we know this to be true, right? Like the more time you spend with people, the more they kind of get under your skin, the more they kind of annoy you, the more you find yourself in conflict with them. But in verse 13, he says this: make allowance for each other's faults. Forgive anyone who offends you. It means that we recognize that it sucks when people expect perfection out of us, right? That's not fun, because we have our own faults and flaws and mistakes, right? And guess what? Others will let us down too. So, we begin with an understanding that every person we know will eventually let us down. So we'll bear with them and make allowances for your mistakes. For their mistakes. And I think for us, this is really relevant right now, is that just as much as you're bothered by the other person that is in your house with you all the time, or just as much as you're bothered by your circumstance, that you're having a hard time dealing with conflict with the people you're around, or even the people you're not around, right? Like you're having conflict with people digitally via text, you're arguing with your friends, or on FaceTime or on phone calls or whatever, you're arguing with your friends. And the thing to keep in mind is to give them allowances for the thing that they're annoying you by. To bear with them. To say, you know what, just as much as I feel annoyed by that right now, I bet there's a bunch of things that I do that are annoying to you too. I bet there are a bunch of things that I do that we could get in a fight over right now too. So remember to make allowances. But why? Why should we ever respond in this way? Like, you guys have probably heard this before, but isn't it pretty strange? Wouldn't it be pretty strange to respond in this way in a culture that's very much like all about payback and vengeance and eye for an eye, and you did this to me, so you should pay, so it should be even? Right? And Paul brings us to this realization. It's that we have peace with God. We have hope, we have purpose, we have love, we have freedom in meeting, not because we earned it and deserved it, no, but because of what God did when he brought conflict and pain into our relationship. And we brought that. We brought that conflict and pain into our relationship with God. God so mercifully invited us back into a relationship. So remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. And I think it's when that idea begins to sink in, we realize there's a different way of handling conflict. It's a way that's not normal to this world. It's not common. It's set apart. It's different. It's holy. It's rooted in love. It's guided by mercy. It's not concerned with treating people the way they deserve at all, but it's focused on reconciliation and restoration. I love the way that Paul kind of ends this section of writing. Ends this section of the letter. He says, above all, clothe yourselves with love. Above all, clothe yourselves with love. The most important thing that people see and understand about you is the way that you love others. Above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts, for as members of one body, you are called to live in peace. Always be thankful. So here's the reality. Here's our reality this morning, each one of us. It's conflict. Conflict is unavoidable. There's no way out. It's not evil, and it's not destructive by nature. But if we want to have healthy relationships, and that's friendships, dating relationships, relationships with your parents or your siblings, if you want to have healthy relationships, the reality is that we need to do things differently than the way that we see them modeled for us. We have to be the ones that say, you know what? We're going to do this differently. In this passage, I think Paul gives us some really, really simple fundamental principles for how to approach conflict. So if you have something that you can scribble a couple thoughts down with, I recommend that. But here's the reality. It's just three simple things. Approach conflict with gentleness, patience, and humility. Approach conflict with gentleness, faithfulness, with patience and humility. Gentleness, patience, and humility. Don't be harsh. Don't be haughty. Be calm. Be gentle. You can share your feelings with what's going on while being gentle. Be patient with others.
Good morning, Caroline.